Hello, Muslim friends in the world. The sky above the Negev Desert remained dark, with only a faint orange hue beginning to brush the horizon. The morning wind blew cold, carrying fine dust that blanketed Israel's secret military base in the south. Inside the concrete bunkers, soldiers of the Golani Brigade, an elite force whose name is feared across the Middle East, were preparing for a major operation that had long been planned. No one expected that what appeared to be an ordinary dawn would turn into a blood-soaked hell. At 4:17 a.m., a loud boom echoed from a distance, too fast to be noticed, too late to be saved. In an instant, Iranian ballistic missiles shot through the air like lightning, piercing Israel's sophisticated defense systems that had long been considered impenetrable. A massive explosion struck the heart of the base. The sky erupted in bursts of orange and blood red. The sound of the explosion echoed for dozens of kilometers. Uniformed bodies were hurled, buildings collapsed, and the ground trembled as if shaken by an earthquake. Ear-splitting screams mixed with the clash of metal. Flames roared, and black smoke obscured all vision. "We are under attack! We are under attack!" Panicked voices blared over the communication radios, but it was already too late. Within minutes, more than 2,000 soldiers of the Golani Brigade were dead, most without even having the chance to touch their weapons. Those who had long been the pride of Israel, battle-hardened in the toughest terrains, met a powerless end on their own soil. Eyewitnesses described the devastation as an unimaginable catastrophe. An invisible force struck not only the bodies but also shattered the minds of the surviving soldiers. Some ran amidst the flames, others stood frozen, staring at the lifeless bodies around them. In the distance, the sun began to rise, but there was no light of hope. Only thick black smoke billowing skyward, carrying the scent of gunpowder, burnt flesh, and an unspeakable sense of ruin. That dawn was not the beginning of a new day. That dawn was the beginning of a far greater destruction. It didn't take long for the horror in southern Israel to spread like a shockwave across the entire nation. While the dust had not yet fully settled and the fires still blazed amid the ruins, one bitter fact began to emerge. Israel's most advanced air defense systems had completely failed. Until that moment, the Iron Dome, the pride of the nation and a symbol of security believed capable of defending Israel from thousands of rockets, had stood as a cornerstone of national defense. Behind it, the David Sling and Arrow 3 systems served as additional layers of protection, considered nearly impossible to breach. But that night, all those beliefs were shattered to pieces. Iran, in an operation meticulously prepared over months in total secrecy, launched its latest generation of missiles. Hypersonic precision-guided missiles capable of traveling faster than sound and changing direction mid-air to evade radar detection. This technology completely outsmarted Israel's defense system operators, who could only watch helplessly as their radar screens showed unknown target mere seconds before destruction struck. With a single devastating explosion, the underground Israeli military hideout, long believed to be a safe zone, was utterly obliterated. For military analysts, this was not merely a missile attack. This was a declaration of power. Iran showed the world that it no longer relied solely on proxy militias in the region, but had now reached a level of military sophistication capable of matching or even surpassing Israel. This is not an ordinary missile. This is a weapon that cannot be stopped, said a European defense expert who declined to be named. Israel, which for decades had enjoyed technological superiority in the region, suddenly found itself facing an equal, perhaps even a more advanced adversary. In the military command center in Tel Aviv, generals and officers could only stare at screens filled with markers of destruction. No one spoke, no one moved. There were only vacant stares and pale faces. The systems they had prided themselves on, the protocols they had long trusted, meant nothing in the face of Iran's precision missiles that struck with deadly accuracy. As the last radio signal from the southern base cut off, one final sentence was heard. "We can't stop it. Then silence. Only the thunder of explosions broke the stillness. For the first time in decades, Israel felt powerless. No words could truly capture what remained after the explosion. Across the scorched sands, amidst the rubble of shattered concrete, melted steel, and the lingering stench of blood, more than 2,000 lifeless bodies lay still. They were Israel's finest soldiers. The Golani Brigade, a name forever associated with victory, bravery, and strength, was now reduced to an empty shadow of its former glory. No one had the chance to fight. No one had the chance to resist. Death came swiftly, brutally, and silenced everything. Most of them hadn't even had time to put on their bulletproof vests. Some had just finished their briefings. Others were still asleep when the first missile struck. Bodies were strewn across the ground, some burned beyond recognition, others trapped beneath the weight of collapsed concrete. The military radios fell silent. Communications were severed. Only the sound of burning flames and the occasional small explosions from igniting ammunition broke the eerie stillness. One eyewitness, a soldier who survived with burns across half his body, could only whisper weakly through his tears, "I saw my best friend. He didn't have time to run. 1 second and then he was gone. Everything was gone." As news of the loss of 2,000 lives spread, Israel was frozen in shock. In cities across the country, television screens began broadcasting censored images, rows of body bags lining the military base. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Search and rescue teams worked without rest. But the hope of finding survivors faded with every passing hour. Hundreds of families waited outside military bases, their eyes hollow, holding their breath as names were announced. Every name spoken was a knife, cutting into hundreds of hearts. In a synagogue in Jerusalem, hundreds of candles were lit in silence. This was not just a loss. This was the deepest wound Israel had ever suffered in its military history. The Golani Brigade was more than just an army unit. They were a symbol that Israel would never bow. But that night, the symbol crumbled. They fell without ever lifting a weapon. They died not on foreign soil, but on their own land, in the heart of the nation they had sworn to protect. This wound is not just a number, it is a scar on the soul of a nation. And everyone knew, a wound this deep would never heal without the shedding of new blood. As news of the Golani Brigade's destruction spread across Israel, the shockwave struck not only the battlefield but also the political heart of the nation. In the dimly lit underground National Command Center in Jerusalem, pale faces filled the room. Monitors displayed images of devastation too horrific to believe. The senior officers stood silent. No one dared to speak. At the center of the chaos sat a man with a tense face and bloodshot eyes. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Netanyahu, a leader long known as the symbol of Israel's strength and resolve, now appeared shaken. His hands trembled as he stared at the heartbreaking reports. 2,031 dead, most of them from the Golani Brigade. Over 500 severely wounded. Total failure of the national defense systems. Calls for accountability began to rise within the cabinet and parliament. Opposition politicians called the tragedy the greatest failure in Israel's history and demanded Netanyahu's resignation. In that emergency meeting, the choices narrowed dangerously. Launch a massive retaliatory strike against Iran, risking a regional or even global war. Hold back, risking being perceived as weak by enemies and losing the trust of the people. If we remain silent, we lose. If we strike back, we may destroy the entire region, murmured a general, his eyes fixed on a digital map glowing red with markers. Netanyahu knew one thing. The decision made that night would be written into history forever. Meanwhile, on the streets of Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Haifa, a wave of anger began to rise. Thousands poured into the streets, no longer merely grieving. They were furious. Banners read, "Our soldiers' blood is not a political tool. Who is responsible? Netanyahu, step down." Television stations broadcast images of escalating protests, while social media exploded with hashtags. Hashtag Netanyahu out and hashtag Brigade Golani. Public trust crumbled along with the walls of the once unshakable defense system they had believed in for so long. In the darkness of that underground room, Netanyahu stared at the blank screen before him. His thoughts spiraled. His eyes were swollen. His body seemed to age by decades in a single night. On one hand, he was still a war leader. On the other, he had become the symbol of catastrophic failure. And out there, the people of Israel began to ask, is it time for the Netanyahu era to end? That night, it wasn't just the smoke of missiles that filled Israel's skies, but also the dark, looming cloud of political uncertainty. As news of the devastating attack crossed borders and continents, the world stood frozen in fear. Images from Israel, burning red skies, scattered debris, bodies covered in dust and blood, filled television screens and mobile phones in every corner of the globe. Media outlets everywhere echoed a single chilling phrase, a global tragedy. In Washington, the lights of the White House remained on through the night. The President of the United States immediately convened an emergency meeting with national security advisors. "We are on the brink of a regional disaster," said one senior diplomat, his face tense. "If Israel retaliates, this will no longer be just an Israel-Iran conflict. Syria, Lebanon, Russia, and even America itself could be pulled into this." The United Nations swiftly called for a Security Council meeting. Voices urged both sides to exercise restraint. But for those who understood the reality on the ground, such words felt hollow. In Moscow, Beijing, and London, governments began preparing for the worst-case scenario. Satellite signals revealed massive military mobilizations across the Middle East. The stock markets were hit immediately. Oil prices soared more than 20% within hours. Major airlines suspended flights to the Middle East. Global investors panicked. Whispers of nuclear escalation began to circulate through media and diplomatic corridors. Everyone was asking the same question: is this the beginning of World War III? On social media, waves of solidarity and outrage flooded global platforms. On one side, hashtags like hashtag Pray for Israel and hashtag Golani Heroes dominated Twitter and Instagram. On the other, hashtags such as hashtag Stand with Iran and hashtag Stop the Occupation rose in defiance of the prevailing narrative. The information war raged as fast and as fiercely as the battles on the ground. Videos of explosions, images of corpses, and recordings of screams spread at lightning speed, creating a psychological tension that transcended geographic boundaries. Civilians in Israel and neighboring countries rushed to supermarkets and gas stations. Long lines stretched on. Sirens wailed without end. In Iran, the public celebrated what they called a victory, but military leaders remained on high alert, knowing that Israel's retaliation was only a matter of time. One haunting sentence echoed everywhere: this war could destroy more than just two nations. It could shatter the global order itself. A new chapter had begun. The military maps displayed in control rooms from Tel Aviv to Tehran, from the Pentagon to the Kremlin, all showed the same grim reality. The world was moving toward the edge of the abyss. And for the first time in a long while, humanity asked itself in fear, can we still turn back before it's too late? Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa. Cities that usually sparkle with lights were now shrouded in somber shadows. The streets lay empty, shops were closed, and warning sirens wailed every few hours, as if to remind everyone that the danger was far from over. In every corner of the cities, people ran toward underground shelters. Children cried. Mothers tried to soothe them with trembling hands, while fathers stared at the sky, a sky they could no longer trust. Every distant explosion made hearts pound faster. Every blast carved new trauma into old wounds. Inside the narrow bunkers, the sound of weeping mixed with prayers whispered in different languages. Hebrew, English, Russian. There were no differences here. Fear united them in a silence that pierced deep. In the heart of Tel Aviv, once busy streets turned into deserted corridors. Luxury restaurants, cafes, cinemas, all were shut. Traffic lights blinked aimlessly over intersections no longer crossed by anyone. Only ambulances, military vehicles, and the occasional helicopter broke the suffocating stillness. Even in Jerusalem, the holy city of three religions, the atmosphere grew tense and grim. The pilgrims who usually filled the Western Wall were now replaced by heavily armed soldiers standing guard at every corner. This fear belonged not only to soldiers or politicians, it belonged to ordinary people. Rachel, a mother of two in Beersheba, spoke with a trembling voice in front of the camera. "I don't know what to tell my children. Will they go to school tomorrow? Will we even be alive tomorrow?" For most citizens, nothing was more terrifying than the uncertainty. They knew the enemy was still out there. The missiles could fall again at any moment, and war could erupt on a scale far greater than anyone could imagine. Meanwhile, on social media and television, the mood grew darker. Every update, every new threat, every military maneuver shook the already shattered hearts of the people. The line between war and peace grew thinner, almost invisible. Everyone held their breath. Every family prepared an emergency bag. All waited to see if this night would be the last night they would ever know as normal. As Israel reeled in the shadow of devastation and its people hid behind concrete walls, thousands of kilometers away, in Tehran, the faces on television screens looked very different. Firm, confident, even proud. The Iranian government, which had remained silent for days, finally broke its silence in a press conference broadcast to the entire world. In front of the cameras, Iran's military spokesperson stood tall, backed by the flag of the Islamic Republic and a large map of the Middle East displayed prominently behind him. The man's voice was flat but sharp, each word delivered like a knife piercing the enemy's heart. Our strike is a legitimate response to the aggression and provocations long carried out by Israel in the region. We do not seek war, but let this serve as a warning. Whoever sows the wind shall reap the storm. Iran was not speaking to Israel alone. They were speaking to the world. They showed their old adversaries, the United States, Gulf allies, even Europe, that Iran's military capabilities had reached a level that could no longer be underestimated. The precision missiles that killed 2,000 Israeli soldiers were more than just weapons. They were a symbol of the rise of a new power in the Middle East. Immediately, capitals around the globe moved into action. Washington condemned the attack as an act of deadly aggression, but still called for restraint. Moscow and Beijing offered subtle support to Iran, framing the action as a legitimate response to Israeli violations. The European Union stood divided. Some called for peace, while others began preparing for a potential energy crisis if the conflict escalated. Behind closed diplomatic doors, a global power game was unfolding, and for the first time in decades, Iran found itself in a position of strength. Before ending the press conference, the Iranian spokesman looked straight into the camera, his voice rising. "We do not desire a devastating war, but if Israel chooses the path of fire, let the whole world know." "We are ready to answer with a fire even greater." Those words struck like a psychological bomb. In Tel Aviv, military leaders listened with clenched jaws. In Jerusalem, Netanyahu stared at the screen, expressionless. The world knew this was not just a warning. It was an invitation to the edge of war. After Iran spoke, the atmosphere on the international stage shifted. No one knew what Israel's next move would be. No one dared to guess when the next strike might fall. All that remained was the simmering tension beneath the surface, and the ticking of the clock toward the possibility of annihilation. The sky over the Middle East appeared calm, but beneath the surface, the world stood on a knife's edge, breathing in a fragile pause between war and total destruction. In Israel's underground command rooms, generals stared at digital maps glowing red. At the meeting table, Benjamin Netanyahu sat in silence, his eyes vacant, his mind consumed by demands for vengeance and the looming threat of even greater devastation. On the other side, Iran was on full alert. Additional missiles were being readied, military bases fortified, and thousands of troops placed on standby. One wrong move, one stray bullet, could ignite a fire no one could extinguish. Netanyahu faced the most difficult choice of his life. If he retaliated, Israel could trigger a multi-front war that would devastate not only Tel Aviv and Tehran, but potentially involve Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, Syria, and even global powers. If he held back, his leadership could collapse, and Israel would appear weak in the eyes of both its enemies and its own people. Outside, thousands of Israeli citizens flooded the streets, some calling for war, others pleading for peace. The cries of mourning families blended with the shouts of protesters. "Strike back! Strike back! Stop the war!" The nation stood divided, torn between fear and fury. In New York, the UN Security Council scrambled for a solution, but diplomacy faltered. In Washington, leaders braced for the possibility of intervention. In Moscow and Beijing, generals watched carefully, ready to act if the conflict spiraled out of control. The entire world held its breath. Everyone knew we were just one spark away from global disaster. Israeli fighter jets began moving toward strategic zones. Surveillance drones hovered over Iran and Lebanon. Underground, special forces prepared for operations that would only be launched if the button was truly pressed. Netanyahu stood by the window of the command headquarters, gazing at the sky as it turned crimson with the setting sun. In his hand lay two choices: to destroy or to end it. A soft voice crackled over the radio. "Orders, sir. The world is waiting for your command." The final chapter of this crisis remained unwritten. Would Israel strike back? Would Iran take another step? Would the world burn in a war no one could truly win? No one knew the answer. All that anyone knew was this: the fire had already been lit. Now the world could only wait to see whether the embers would fade or ignite a blaze that would consume us all.